There comes a point in life where you look around and realize no one's really there. The phone doesn't ring like it used to. The text threads go quiet. The laughter that used to fill the room, gone. It's just you. And while the world keeps shouting, community, 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 you're sitting in silence, wondering if anyone even notices you're not in the room anymore. And that hurts. It stings in places you didn't even know could ache. Because we weren't created to do life alone, but sometimes we're called to it anyway. See, when you find yourself with no friends, no crew, no ride or die, the first thing the enemy tries to do is convince you that something must be wrong with you, that you're too much or not enough, that you're awkward or unworthy or simply not lovable. And that's how he gets in through the echo chamber of isolation. But listen to me, the absence of friends is not the absence of God. Just because people walked away doesn't mean God did. Just because people forgot you doesn't mean heaven did. And just because you feel unseen doesn't mean you're not being held. God will still be enough when no one else is. That's not just a cute phrase to throw around when things are rough. That's a lifeline. That's the kind of truth you grab onto when your tears hit the pillow and nobody texts back. That's the truth that holds you together when the loneliness gets loud, when you have no one else to confide in, no one else to vent to, no one else to pray with. God doesn't just hear you, he surrounds you. He leans in closer. He becomes the friend that sticks closer than a brother. Not just in theory, but in experience. Some of the deepest intimacy I've ever had with God didn't come in a crowd. It came in solitude. It came when I had to sit with the silence and decide if he was still enough. And not just enough to fill time, but enough to satisfy the ache in my soul. And you know what? He was. Not because the ache disappeared overnight, but because I learned that he would meet me in it. There's a kind of nearness, a kind of tenderness that God only reveals when everything else falls away. And maybe that's what he wants for you right now. Not the noise of people, but the clarity of presence, his presence. We love the idea of community, and rightly so, but sometimes we use it as a crutch. We think peace only comes when people are around. We think joy only lives where company is. But the truth is, if your joy can't survive in the quiet, it was never rooted in the right source to begin with. God wants to be your anchor, not your backup plan. Not your last resort when the group chat dries up. He wants to be your friend, your healer, your comforter, your consistency, the one who shows up when no one else does and stays when no one else can. Don't let loneliness drive you to believe lies about who you are. You are not forgotten. You are not broken. You are not being punished. You're being drawn. God is calling you deeper, calling you closer, calling you to trust him in ways you never would have if you were surrounded by applause. And I know that's hard, but it's also holy. Because when all you have is him, that's when you finally realize he really is enough. Rejection doesn't always feel like a lesson at first. Most of the time, it just feels like pain, like silence where there used to be laughter, like cold shoulders that used to be warm embraces. You look around and see all the people you gave your time to, your heart to, and now they're gone. You start asking questions you never planned to ask. What did I do wrong? Why wasn't I enough? Why did they change? And if you're not careful, you start building your worth on their absence. But what if I told you rejection isn't always a curse? What if it's actually a calling? See, we assume being left out means we missed something. But sometimes being left out means God was pulling you in, pulling you away from distractions, pulling you out of things that didn't align with your purpose, pulling you closer to his voice because you were too entangled in theirs. Not every closed door is an attack. Some are divine interventions. God knows what you don't. He sees what you can. And there are times when people walking away is the only way you'll walk into what he's been trying to give you all along. Sometimes rejection is the very tool he uses to refine you, to separate you from the noise so you can hear him clearly. And yes, it hurts. Yes, it feels unfair. But what if the people you're crying over were never meant to stay for your next chapter? What if their departure was a sign that the season had shifted, and holding on to them would have only held you back? Doesn't mean they're bad. It doesn't mean you're bad. It just means that growth often requires shedding. And growth is still grace. You have to stop viewing your isolation as punishment. God doesn't abandon his people. He prepares them. He sets them apart. He sanctifies. And sometimes that sanctification feels like separation. Sometimes he removes access to your heart from people who misused it, not because he wants you to be lonely, but because he wants you to be healed, restored, made whole. Sometimes the no you heard from people was God's yes to something better you couldn't see yet. And don't be surprised when your calling makes you feel like an outcast. When you start walking in purpose, you'll realize not everyone can come with you. Some won't understand, some won't support, some will distance themselves, not because of what you've done wrong, but because of what you've started doing right. That kind of shift exposes real intentions, and even that is grace. Don't mourn what God has already removed. Trust that he knows how to rebuild. Trust that he knows what you need more than you do. And understand this. Sometimes the only way God can get your attention is to quiet the room. And when the room gets quiet, that's when the work begins. That's when you discover that his voice is the only one that doesn't leave when you're no longer useful. That's when you find identity, not in being chosen by people, but in being called by him. Let this be the moment you stop chasing what walked away and start embracing what's been waiting for you all along. Some rejection isn't a loss, it's a redirection. And when God redirects, it's always on purpose, always for purpose, always toward purpose. You ever sit and wonder, what's wrong with me? That's the question that creeps in when people start distancing themselves, when you scroll and see everyone else laughing, linking up, building friendships that look effortless, and you're still by yourself. It gets easy to internalize the silence, easy to assume that the absence of connection is proof of some defect in you. But let me tell you something true, that the enemy doesn't want you to believe. You are not unworthy. You're being refined. Refinement doesn't feel beautiful. It feels like breaking. It feels like being stripped down to what's essential. It feels like the shaking of everything comfortable so that the unshakable part of you can stand. And that's what God is doing in this season. You're not being overlooked. You're being set apart. You're not being abandoned. You're being prepared. Preparation just doesn't post well on social media. Refinement doesn't get likes, but refinement gets you ready. There's a version of you that God is building in the silence that wouldn't survive if you were constantly surrounded by applause. You don't learn endurance when everyone's praising you. You learn endurance when no one sees you, and you choose to show up anyway. When the invites stop, but your value doesn't waver. When you stop basing your confidence on who affirms you and start anchoring it in who formed you, that's when you know refinement is working, because it cuts through all the noise and makes you confront where your worth is rooted. And yes, that's hard, because you want to be chosen. You want to be seen. You want to feel like you matter to someone. That's human. But don't confuse absence with rejection. And don't confuse solitude with punishment. God is not punishing you by allowing you to walk this road alone for a little while. He's proving something in you. He's drawing things out of you that would never emerge if you always had someone to lean on. Sometimes he allows the crutches to fall, so you'll realize you were never crippled to begin with. You just never knew how strong you actually were. That strength, it comes from fire. And fire purifies. Fire reshapes. Fire doesn't destroy what's meant to last. It burns off what was never supposed to stay. So maybe the season of isolation is just the fire. And God's saying, let me refine you so when I send the right people, the right opportunities, the right alignment, you won't sabotage it because of old wounds or a shaky foundation. You're not being forgotten, you're being fortified. And while it's tempting to rush the process, to force connections, to try to prove you're lovable, to seek validation, remember this: anything you have to force will eventually fall apart. But what God builds in refinement, it stands. Because it's built with his hands, and that includes you. He's building you. You're not just in a waiting season, you're in a becoming season. And becoming requires breaking. Becoming requires quiet. Becoming requires trust that God knows exactly what he's doing, even when it feels like nothing's happening at all. So no, you're not unworthy. You're being refined. And when the refining is finished, you'll see you never lost value. You just lost what was never meant to define it. There's a kind of pain that doesn't come from what people did to you, but from what you expected them to be and they never were. It's not always betrayal that breaks you, it's disappointment, that deep, quiet ache of realizing someone you loved, supported, defended, prayed for, never saw you the same way. You kept showing up, kept giving, kept believing this friendship or connection would turn into something real, and instead it slowly unraveled, leaving you holding all the weight of a one-sided bond. Let's be honest. It hurts to realize someone was only around for the version of you that benefited them. The version that said yes. The version that didn't confront. The version that didn't grow. But when you started changing, when you started choosing peace over chaos, truth over people-pleasing, healing over hiding, they started pulling back, and you were left wondering, was it me? And that question right there can become a prison if you're not careful. You start rehearsing moments in your head, overanalyzing your worth through someone else's absence. And if you're not rooted, their withdrawal becomes your reflection. But the truth is, sometimes people walk away not because you lack something, but because they never intended to stay when you started becoming whole. Some people love your brokenness because it makes them feel needed. But the moment you start healing, growing, setting boundaries, they call you distant or different or difficult. But you're not difficult. You're just done being drained. God is not cruel when he allows connections to fall apart. Sometimes it's his protection, because what he's building in you can't be sustained with people who only loved the old version of you, the version that tolerated things in silence, the version that kept shrinking to keep peace, the version that felt guilty for needing more. That version of you had to go. So yes, the breaking had to happen. Yes, the silence had to come because it taught you what presence really means. It taught you to recognize the difference between attachment and loyalty, between proximity and intimacy. And maybe that's the lesson. Don't confuse being surrounded with being supported. You can have a circle full of people and still feel unseen, still feel unknown. So God, in his mercy, removes the noise, not to isolate you, but to show you who you really are when you're not being shaped by the approval or expectations of others. It's in the quiet where you learn to affirm yourself, where you learn to stop begging people to stay and start thanking God they left before they had the chance to do more damage. There's freedom in releasing the need to be understood by everyone, because not everyone is assigned to your journey, and not everyone has the capacity to carry the weight of who you're becoming. So don't mourn the people who left when you started growing. Don't internalize their absence. Let it be a sign, a confirmation that God is removing what can't go with you into this next season. You're not unlovable because they couldn't love you right. You're not too much because they couldn't handle your truth. You're not alone. You're being aligned with peace, with purpose, with people who don't need an old version of you to feel comfortable in your presence. Let go of what was never meant to stay and make room for what's coming, because what's ahead is worth every empty seat.